For me, the most enjoyable part of this game is the close games, the ones that come down to the wire. And I think that is probably the case for a lot of you watching as well. When the match is decided in the first 5 minutes, it's tough to have fun, even if you're on the winning team. I personally don't enjoy those matches nearly as much as the ones that make it to those final few minutes of the game when I really don't know who's going to win, my team or the enemy team. There's just more at stake, and it makes the game that much more enjoyable for me. This match is going to be one of those, but it's really going to require a lot of work on our part, as well as someone on the enemy team. I think that's one of the most common parts of these close games, is that I need to do a lot of work on my team to help them get to the late game, and then I also need someone on the enemy team to do the same for their team. And that is not always easy to find, but when it happens, there can be some great battles going on. So Montana is one of those ships where it's just so consistent at long range, mid range, and close range. One of the tankiest, most difficult to kill battleships in the game, and with 12 accurate 406mm guns, it's going to be pretty good in most situations. It's one of the reasons that I played it a ton in competitive back in the day, and why I still really enjoy playing it now. There's a bit of nostalgic factor for that as well, since this ship has been played a ton by me. It's probably the most comfortable ship for me to play. And that really isn't to say this ship is overpowered or anything. I don't think it's the best tier 10 battleship. And if you're looking for a new line to grind, Montana's really good if you already have a few different ships. But as your first line to grind, you might find it to be a little bit underwhelming, since it's lacking some overmatch, some reload, some of the gimmicks that these new lines seem to all have. But in this match, we've already picked up our first kill, and now we're dealing with a bow on Montana and potentially a Conqueror, ready to spam some high explosive at us. So we've got 5 heals ready to go, as we just get a massive salvo into the other Montana's superstructure. It's a pretty accurate ship, and hitting superstructures is a very viable tactic when you don't have the overmatch. It's what I'm constantly doing in Montana when someone is angling to me. I think it's pretty funny, the positioning of our Shimakaze, if I could just point that out for a second. He's gone all the way to the southern part of the map, trying to sneak around behind the enemy team. Of course, he could do a ton of damage from there if he's allowed to get through, but it looks like the enemy team is starting to focus in on him with multiple destroyers and a Conqueror going back there. And yeah, he's not long for this world. We do get ourselves a Citadel into the enemy Montana, so we've done some pretty good work already dealing with one of their linchpin ships. He's got himself into a position where we essentially have to deal with him if we want to push this flank, or even if we want to go help the other side. He's so close to the rounding the corner on this Two Brothers map. It's a very strong position, especially if the enemy team gives up the side of the map. It allows you to reposition and get crossfires very quickly. It's why I tend to play that position if I spawn in the middle of the map. Fortunately, our team has been pushing the other side of the map, so we don't have to push too hard here. We can just take it slow and maintain our HP and hopefully whittle down the enemy team. Our friendly Montana, of course, taking out the Nakamov is a huge bonus. I've been getting some chip damage in on him, but realistically, an angled tier 10 carrier is probably going to bounce most of my armor piercing at these ranges, so I'd have to swap to the HE. And that's not really something I'd be interested in, since most of those carriers are also going to shatter the HE. Broadside Yamato, it is at 22 kilometers. We don't have enough 10 at that range to get through his belt, but we can go through the upper belt and get some decent damage into the superstructure as well, so that's why I aim a little bit high. At longer ranges, it's probably a little better to guarantee those shells on target, rather than go for all of the Citadel damage. Even in ships that do have the pen, it's just unlikely at those ranges, I find, to get those massive Citadel salvos. It's more often that the shells end up just dropping short. Very crucially here, though, our Shimakaze that I pointed out earlier has very much died already, and the enemy Conqueror is pushing up the flank, and we know that the two destroyers are going to be faster than the Conqueror, meaning those DDs are probably catching up with that Conqueror and maybe passing him. So we have a lot of torpedoes to worry about here. I have very little support. The Colombo and Conqueror are already kiting, which is good. And we're all focusing down this Montana, who seemingly decided to make that push I was talking about just a little bit too soon. So we're going to take him out with some shells through the superstructure, collecting our second kill. But those torpedoes are going to be scary, and that's why I stopped at this island. I tried to position myself so I couldn't get ambushed or have some long-range torpedoes, I should say, sent my way while I'm trying to deal with the Montana. It's not a very good idea to go broadside to a Montana at these ranges, so that's why I didn't want to make this exact turn while there was a threat of torpedoes as well. And you can see, here they come. And unfortunately, Montana has the slowest rudder shift in the game for these battleships at tier 10, so we're not actually going to be able to dodge this one. But it's important to keep islands in mind when angling to ships. It's okay to stay in a position like that, as long as I'm staying angled and keeping myself safe. Risking a broadside turn, panicking like that, I probably would have lost more damage than I took from that one torpedo. Of course, Montana has a massive heal nowadays, and that's going to help us get back to a reasonable HP. But we have to run. There's destroyers around, and it's a little bit scary when they launch torpedoes from these ranges. Crucially, though, the Summers is on his way back to our other flank, so it's just the Shimakaze and the Conqueror here. So I feel okay about slowing down here and trying to take out the Conqueror with our team's help. Our friendly Conqueror has turned around, and I know with both of us focusing out a Conqueror at this range, we should do all right, especially if the Conqueror isn't going to be lighting fires. We get very lucky there to not eat a fire after using our damage control. That would have been a full fire. We get decent damage into the Conqueror. At this angle, I thought I could go for a Citadel. It's just a little bit too well angled at this range. I think maybe if I was closer, I could have got Citadels. But here, no overmatch, but that's okay. There's a gigantic superstructure to aim for. This is one of the biggest weaknesses of battleships trying to angle at close range specifically. You hit the superstructure, it doesn't really matter. You're still doing 20k. That's a good salvo into a broadside target, and we did that to an angled Conqueror. This is why at longer ranges it definitely works to angle, but at closer ranges, overmatch matters a little bit less at these mid ranges. At the ultra close range, of course it starts to matter again since you can target the Citadel, but at these mid ranges, yeah, it hurts to hit superstructures. I think that's one area where I would love to see Wargaming buff the tankiness of some of these battleships. There's very little incentive to push in when there's that much damage being taken through the superstructures, right? I think if they reduced it to just overpens, maybe looked at making superstructures saturate like the French destroyer extremities do, something to make it so you don't take, well, 20,000 damage a salvo through your superstructure. That seems like a little bit too much to me. But onto the battle though, we've taken out the Conqueror, and seemingly we don't have to deal with the Shimakaze since he has smoked up and the Conqueror is between us and the smoke. That's why I'm risking the turn here. If there were torpedoes, they would have been spotted. So I'm okay with making the turn, and I swapped to the HE mostly for the Shimakaze. I was hoping he would pop up and maybe our Conqueror would get him. And he does, very fortunately. Which, unfortunately, though, means we're not actually close to our Kraken yet. We're going to have to get a little bit more done in this game. Yamato running away, of course, a great option when facing a Montana, Colombo, and Conqueror. But Sap hurts at pretty much any angle, as the Colombo gets a decent salvo in. And so does HE. Montana HE really is no joke. I remember we did some testing before some Kings of the Seas back in the day on the efficiency of Montana HE versus Conqueror HE, specifically against bow in Russian cruisers like Moskva, for example, trying to get them out of positions like that, since no battleship is really going to overmatch them everywhere with that 50mm plating. So we relied on HE, and we found, or at least I found when I was doing this, that Montana did better than Conqueror at these long-range HE salvos in angled targets. And yeah, 8,500 damage is pretty good, although I'll be honest, having a Colombo and a Conqueror all hit him at the same time, Yamato took a lot of damage even though he was angled at longer ranges. It's not like Montana has better HE than Conqueror. It's just that Montana has better accuracy. Getting more shells on target can make up for the, well, lack of damage and fire chance compared to a Conqueror. And of course, a Summers at 4,000 HP, it's not going to take too many hits to take him out with our HE as well. There's our 4th kill, on to 141,000 damage. And look at this, down to the basically last 5 minutes of the game, and it's still close. Unfortunately, the enemy team did lose their carrier, meaning we had a massive advantage throughout this game. So it's pretty easily swung in our favor in this late game. But this Napoli is also on 4 kills. This is what I'm talking about. There needs to be someone on the enemy team doing work as well. You notice our team had pushed up the 7, 8, 9 lines very well, enough to even take out the enemy carrier. And yet they're all dead now. I think this Napoli has done a ton of work to make this game close, and that's really what's required. Someone on both teams kind of putting their team on their back, and it's resulted in a showdown. Both players with 4 kills and facing one another. Not in a fair one-on-one. I unfortunately have a carrier supporting me and a Conqueror, so it's not quite fair, unfortunately. But a Napoli is still very dangerous since we don't have a radar, and he can use a fuel smoke to get really close and potentially torpedo us. Now that we're spotted again, we do spot the Napoli back. The instant smoke does give us a slight opportunity to get a salvo in, and a lot of bounces. Napolis are very tanky. We still do nearly 10k damage, I think, so still pretty solid stuff from the Montana. And now we have to figure out what the best option is. Do we turn out and run away trying to avoid the torpedoes, but in the process show flat broadside to a ship that can definitely citadel us at these ranges? Or do I go bow in and risk the Brawl and hope that I can come out on top? Well, if you know me, I'm going to push W key, and even if there are some consequences to it, I think it's just going to be more fun. I'm trying to watch the smoke to see which way this Napoli wants to turn to get some torpedoes off. Of course, I did expect him to kind of go towards the north and not towards the south, so that's why I was starting to turn my turrets. We dodged the first torpedo salvo? Not quite. The Montana rudder shift, of course, is a little bit rough. And the Napoli has to go so broadside to get the torpedoes on us, we're going to get a free shot. And no citadel. So this Napoli has an opportunity for torps. I'm trying to slow down here, but also dodge the torps as much as possible. And it results in a ram. We both get our Krakens here, as you can see. Double Kraken unleashed, double ram to get that Kraken. What an awesome close game. Props to Freelancer for doing so well on the enemy team. And it just came down to, I think, the extra carrier spotting we had throughout this match. But a very close one. I had a ton of fun. I hope you guys enjoyed this one as well, since we did result in the top of our team, and of course Freelancer on the top of his team. A very well played game, and these close ones are just the most fun. As for the Montana build, since this ship is just so good in so many different situations, I've got just a pretty general tank build on it right now, using one of the American Special Commanders to get that fast shell swap to the HE, since it is pretty solid. Grease the Gears is very nice on a ship that tends to move its turrets around a lot, trying to get the best target. It's not likely that I'm going to stay on one target if someone ends up going broadside. That's really what I'm looking for, is those broadsides. Adrenaline Rush standard, I would say, along with these 3 upgrades here, getting concealment as well as the extra healing and tankiness. Don't really need to go for secondary since this ship doesn't have anything to do with special advantages like Ohio or the German battleships, even Shikishima with a little bit of extra range on it and extra pen on those secondaries. This Montana, pretty standard, not worth going for secondaries in my opinion, mostly because I have an Ohio, so you could go for it if you wanted to. This ship is so versatile and able to build for whatever you really want to. I personally like improved repair party readiness, even over basics of survivability, since the heals are so gigantic on this ship that that little bit of extra fire damage I'm taking doesn't feel too bad, and getting to the extra heals is likely. Since Montana is so tanky anyway, so I find myself having a tough time making it through all of the massive heals, getting the value out of them, I think that's the toughest thing to do with these big giant Monty heals these days. So getting to them quicker while taking a little bit more fire damage is kind of the direction I've decided to go right now, but probably basic survivability is just better if you're wanting to go for an optimal build. Of course, we're running Artillery Replotting Room Mod 2, 11% dispersion. That is just glorious. It's so nice on these American battleships. Pretty standard otherwise. Main Battery Mod 2, of course, just to help with those close range situations where Montana's an old battleship in this game, does not have the gimmicky fast turret traverse like the Ohio does. I think you can get Ohio to have better turret traverse than Des Moines by quite a lot. A friend of mine loves to point that out. He's a Des Moines main and a little bit sad about how that ship is sometimes. Damage Control Party Mod 1 is a bit of a meme. You're sacrificing main gun survivability to gain a 30-second damage control. Damage control a double fire and have those HE spammers try and relight you, but they can't for 30 seconds. It's pretty hilarious. Maybe not good, but it's definitely funny. Montana, just a great all-arounder, and of course, 2 Krakens in the same game? How often does that happen? I figured I had to show that to you guys. But thank you very much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.